Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Living in the Light. Let us start this morning with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, be with us all. Be so strongly present in our hearts and in our thoughts that we see this world through a diaphanous curtain of Thy presence, that attunement with Thee becomes no effort, but just the most natural way to be in this world. Help us to separate ourselves from limitation, that we may merge ourselves into our relationship with the divine within, the divine around, the divine in everything. Om, peace. Amen. Since fact-checking is a very important part of our present society, after yesterday's conversation, I was doing a little fact-checking, which is actually just a memory scan, because specifically I'm talking about the whole long incident I told at the end with Swami Kriyananda and the Sunday readings. And just because I don't like to leave untruth, I said that it was my idea to read the Rubaiyat for Sunday service. I'm really not sure that that's true. It could easily have been Swami's idea, and my enthusiasm for it made me think it was my idea. I honestly have no idea what the truth of that was, and so I didn't want to leave that one. I'm pretty sure that I was the one who suggested we do it for a second year, but that would just be too obvious. The other thing was that when Swamiji absolved me from the necessity to read those long readings on Sunday, it didn't take me a day to sort that one out. It was just later that same day. Because there he gave me exactly what I was asking for, but it did not sit well with me. I casually said a day or two later, but it was, I believe it was 2 hours afterwards. It's just, he said I wanted something, he gave it to me, I had it in my hands, but it was out of tune, and so it made me very uneasy. And I just was living with that uneasiness, and then it suddenly came to me as I was describing yesterday, putting the food into the garbage can, it came into me that I was about to throw away my whole spiritual life. But fortunately, it wasn't like I felt fine and then I woke up later. I felt awful right from the start. And it made me sort of remember, last night I was giving a different class on the chakras, and in the course of that I was talking about the incredible struggle I had before I was able to write the first book I wrote, which is Swami Kriyananda as We've Known Him. I was working at that time on the assignment Swami had given me to write his life story, to write a biography of Swami. I started working on it, I believe, about 2003, after procrastinating for a really long time. And I spent several years, I believe it was 2 or 3 years, just not, working, literally working, but not creating anything. The actual reality, the dynamic was I was so self-critical. I'd been so critical my whole life, especially of other people's artistic efforts. I mean, gosh, the psychology of that was like not very hard to unravel. It's like I was artistically blocked, especially with writing, so I just criticized everyone else. So when I sat down to write, all I did was criticize myself, just continuously. All the criticism I had ever offered to anyone on the planet was inside of me. And so I would write 2 sentences, and this is literally true. I would write a paragraph and I would delete it. Then I would write another paragraph and I would delete it. So at the end of 3 years of intermittent or continuous effort, I had nothing. I mean, like literally nothing. It was impressive. That's the only word I can use. It was really impressive. At some point I ended up with hundreds of pages of stream of consciousness, but it was absolutely unusable. Everything was unusable. So I was talking to Swamiji about it, and I said to him, spiritually, this has been one of the best periods of my life, because enormous delusions within me were just being ripped. All the covering was just ripped off. I was on my knees, Everything was ripped off, and I was balancing karma that had to be balanced. All of that was great. I said, it's been awful. It's been spiritually extremely rich, and from a practical point of view, I have nothing at all. I think I'm saying that fairly calmly. I might have been in tears. I've been in tears several times. I was in tears many times. And so he asked Davy, this is a story I told last night, now I'm telling the whole thing. He asked Davy to write his biography, and she wrote the beautiful book, Faith is My Armor, wonderful book. And that relieved me of the responsibility to write a biography. And then I was freed, because what was killing me was among other things, was the form. I just couldn't deal with the form. But when I could just write stories, which is what I did with Swami Kriyananda, because there was no need, I wasn't responsible for communicating his whole life. I could just say anything that was meaningful to me. But prior to that, when I was on the phone with Swami, just really at the nadir of this, he said, this is a non-starter. It's just not working. You should just not do it. You should give it up. You should just give up, he said. And I was talking about it last night because I was talking about purity of heart, interestingly, where we just can be ourselves without fear. And I realized when he told me that I didn't have to do it. See, because part of me had been, I was doing this because Swami told me to do it. I really hadn't owned it. I was being obedient. And I understood why he wanted me to do it. I mean, I understand why he wanted me to do it, for spiritual and countless other reasons, karmic reasons. But I was still, I hadn't owned it. But when he said, you should give it up, it's like something in me just said, no. I said, no. I have something to say, and it's worth saying. And I said, I'll die trying. But then he still gave the assignment to Davy and liberated me. And eventually I wrote Lightbearer. So it all worked itself out in the end. Now, the end point of that, what was I going to say? It made me reflect, because the story about Swamiji absolving me from having to do the Sunday readings, when I just complained, he said, okay, this is what you want. Here, you can have it. And he just gave it to me. But the fact that I actually figured it out within an hour or two was that it was out of tune. And I could just feel it. I could just feel that even though this is what I wanted, this is what I had just been complaining about and asking for, making everybody's life so annoyed, and now I had it. But it wasn't really what I wanted, because it was out of tune with where Swamiji, where Divine Mother was trying to get me to go. But sometimes the way that we find out that something is out of tune is we go toward it, and we get it, and then we have an experience. So Swami liberated me from this terrible project, because it was such a burden on my life. He liberated me from it. But being liberated from it was out of tune. I mean, I'm talking about both of these incidences. And I remember another that I actually wrote in Lightbearer, a couple of others. One was this man who had this image of himself as this, I am here only for God. The temptations of the world will come and go, but I am here for God. Powerful thing. Except the problem was he was really in love with this woman, and he really wanted to be with her. But he couldn't admit even to himself that he had this desire, because he had this image of who he was supposed to be. So in an attempt to sort it out, he wrote Swami, should I be a monk or should I get married? And Swami, he could have answered, but it wouldn't have done any good to impose obedience upon this man, because if it wasn't an intuition and an emanation from his inner self, it would all his true feelings would simply be suppressed. And as the Gita says, of what avail is suppression? And as Swami puts it, and those feelings will just express themselves in some weird way later, and nothing helpful will happen from it at all. So Swami, understanding the psychology of the man, just said emphatically, you should be a monk. And when that was spoken by Swami, the man said, but I want to get married. And it was like, by pushing him in one direction really far, he finally was able to say who he really wanted to be. And he did marry, and it actually worked out very well, because That was who he was supposed to be. So this reverse psychology, so to speak, if we're thinking about attunement, and the other one I wrote about in Lightbearer, which was really interesting, it was, let me just think about it. Yeah, it was sort of the same thing. It was when the woman known as Parameshwari, with whom Swami was involved in 1981 from February to November. Later on, she went back to her husband. She had a child. That marriage fell apart. Now she's a single mother with an infant. She doesn't really quite know where to go. She writes Swami a letter and asks if she can come back to Ananda. Not to be with him, but just to come back. But before she comes back, she wants to be assured that she'll have a place to live and she'll have a job, just that she'll be able to take care of her child. It was very, very interesting, and I wrote it up at length in that book. It would be around 1983 or 84 when this happened. Now let me pull the pieces together. And there were other parts of it. And Swami wrote back, and it's interesting, you see, there was a lot at stake for her, and he knew it. And here she was offering to step back into Ananda and conceivably step back into the enormous spiritual promise he had seen for her. But he wrote back, he said, I absolutely refuse to guarantee you anything. He said this more graciously. He said, I believe Ananda will continue and be successful, but I can't promise you that it will be. It's all in God's hands. We have no idea. He said, you can't come here for security. If you really want God above everything else, then you're welcome here. Otherwise, no. And then he suggested to her that she stay in the city and live near an SRF temple and take care of her child and get all the things that she seemed to want. And now, see, that was the advice he gave her. But the test was actually different. The test was, but I do want only God, and I do trust God, and I want to raise my child in a spiritual community. This is what I want. But instead she said, okay. And I knew, because I talked to Swamiji after it. I don't make these things up. Fortunately, I had that one, because it happened years ago. He explained himself to me because he knew I had to do this. I have made a number of intuitive leaps, but I have only made those intuitive leaps after years of confirmation. When I wrote Swami Kriyananda as we have known him, I wrote the whole book on my own without showing it to Swamiji. I don't think I showed it to him piecemeal. I'm pretty sure that I didn't, and if I did, it was only a little here and there. But then I finished the book while staying in his house in Gurgaon. It was sort of like I hadn't quite, exactly why we did that, I'm not sure. Maybe it was just an obvious thing to do. He had a place in his house. Actually, it was actually a tent that was placed on the roof, the flat roof of the house he had there, because all the rooms were filled. But it was he set it up for Jyotish and Devi, and they weren't there, so I was able to stay in it. It was a lovely place to stay. And I stayed there for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Seems like I was there for a long time. And I finished the book there. And I brought the whole manuscript to him, and we sat side by side. And I sat next to him while he read, turned the pages. And he anything he didn't agree with. And there were stories where I drew the conclusion myself. I put the pieces together, and then I made strong statements about his consciousness, about his intention, about the result of things. And I felt very confident in doing it. I also knew that he would review it. So I just thought, I'll just do it. I'll just say what I think is true, which I'd been doing for a long time anyway. But, some of them, they were just right there. And I would just look at him. He knew. And he would just turn the page. He let it. Because he did point out things that weren't right. Now that I'm into this, one of them this was a very interesting one. I had said, at a certain point, Swamiji said to me, people don't respect me because I'm so youthful looking. And then he said, what I attributed it to him was that he prayed to Master that his hair turn white. And it did. And then he began to look more mature and people took him more seriously. So I wrote that he prayed to Master that his hair turn white. He said, I never did that. I said, "Sir, I know that you did. You were standing here," and I described the visual moment, and he said, "I never did that." I said, "Swamiji, you did." And then we just left it like that. And then that night, when I was asleep, a lot of times when I'm not clear about something, even I do this now, I'll take a short nap. And then when I go into subconsciousness and relax the conscious mind, when I wake up, I know what it's clear to me. I'll get solutions to writing problems or personal problems. So I went to sleep, and then in the middle of the night I woke up and said, "Oh, of course he didn't say that. He said, I prayed to Master to solve the problem." And then the next morning again, Swami said, he came to me and said, "I never said that." "You're right, sir, you're absolutely right. Because you never would say that. You would never tell Master how to solve the problem. You would only present to Master that this was a dilemma that he needed to take care of." Swami said, "Yes." And it was interesting to me because in all the words in that book, that was the only actual misremembering. Because one of the reasons I defended myself as a writer in that whole book, which was very amusing to me. Swami treated me with this tremendous respect as the author, and I actually felt this tremendous integrity as the author. You know, I didn't make any decision in that book casually. Every decision was very carefully thought out and consistent. So it wasn't like this was whimsical, oh, it can just be something else. It's like I was committed for good reason. So I really defended that. I also defended it because I said, "Sir, I'm relying on my memory a lot, and I remember that." But it was a very important lesson because the point wasn't what he said. The point was he would never have said that. And that's why it wasn't that he remembered what he said. He knew that he would never have said that. And that I felt afterwards, because I thought, why did I make a mistake like that? There were so many other bigger, more dynamic issues. And that was the one where I really was wrong. And I'm pretty sure that's the only actual correction he made, a factual correction. We had, I'll finish in a minute. We had another dispute, but it was for entirely other reasons. But I think God put that in there to burn into my consciousness that pay attention to the principle. Because a lot of people who talk about spiritual things or even write about Swami, this is not fair of me, but when you write about a spiritual person, and again, Swami trained me in this because I was with him when he wrote The Path. I typed the manuscript for him. And he talked about it, and he talked exactly like that. Sometimes you don't have the exact words, or sometimes you're not sure word for word what he said, but you know what he said. And Swamiji said the spoken and the written word are different. The impact is different. Sometimes you have to edit. You can have the verbatim spoken word, but to communicate what he really said, you have to edit the spoken word, because when it's written, it's different. But it seems so small, but it changed the principle, and the principle is what mattered. I would never have told Master what to do. I didn't pray for my hair to turn white. I prayed to Master that I looked too youthful, and that it seems that it would help my work if I looked more mature. And then my hair turned white. So then, ever after, whenever I wrote about Swami, I always paid attention to the nuance. Because you shift one word, and you've changed the nuance. And then the principle is lost. And when you write or talk about spiritual people, and again, Swami would say this, when somebody would say to him, "Tell us a story about Master," Swami said his mind would go blank. But if he was trying to illustrate a principle, countless examples from Master's life would come to him, because it wasn't a personality cult. It was a living expression of what it means to be a disciple, what it means to be a divine person, what it means to be surrendered to God. This was very interesting to me now that I'm just chattering about this. This looks like our whole morning. I want to go back to the other dispute I had with Swami. But once I was in Southern California on a lecture tour. I'll back up a whole lot farther. Living in Palo Alto, as we have since 1987, a lot of times many different spiritual teachers would come through this area. And even though on one hand it's well, now we're talking attunement. On one hand, it's sort of fun to go see other spiritual teachers. There's sometimes serious attunement issues. So it was not possible for me to really go have satsang with any other teacher, because as soon as I did that, it became the thing for Ananda people to do. Just in my position, I just simply didn't have the freedom to do that, because I saw, and I'll put it like this, I saw that when people immerse themselves in another ray, it usually, I won't say always, but it usually put them slightly out of tune with this ray. Now we're talking attunement. For many years, I had this Rudrakshamala, which I had that Rudrakshamala since like 1972, and I lost it. I left it in a hotel in Tiberias in Israel last January. Oddly, it just seemed like it was time for it to go. It was not an evanescent amulet from the astral world, because I kept it for decades. I just walked out of the hotel room and left it there, and it was gone. But for a long time on it, I had a little wooden charm. I can't think what you call it right now, but a little wooden. It's funny, I can't think of the word. Thing that hangs from a chain. And on one side, I had a picture of Master, and on the other side, I had a picture of Anandamoyi Ma. It was homemade in our one little Ananda industry we had, where they routed out pieces of manzanita and put pretty things or pictures into it. And locket. But it wasn't a locket either. It was just something that hung from a chain. I wore that for many years. And then it began to feel wrong to me to be wearing Anandamoyi Ma's picture. I mean, Swamiji was very close to her. Master writes about her in the autobiography, but she wasn't my guru. And all I can say is it just didn't feel right. So I took it off and I gave it to someone for whom it was more appropriate. And they loved it, and it was very nice. Everything was solved, and I felt better after I took it off. Swamiji talks about himself when he was in India. At one point, he met a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya, direct disciple of Lahiri, or through Lahiri's line, probably not direct because he would have been too old or too young. And that disciple offered to Swamiji to give him additional higher Kriya initiations. And Swamiji was eager to have them. And he reasoned it out that he had just not been with Master long enough for Master to have given him these initiations. It was from Lahiri Mahashaya. It was the direct lineage that he was a part of. So he accepted it. But in order to get the techniques, he had to also take an initiation from this sadhu. And Swami made that as an important part of it. It wasn't just that he was learning something. He was allowing himself to be initiated by another teacher. And Swami learned the techniques, and he said he practiced them assiduously for 6 months. And he said, it's just like every day his attunement with Master began to decline. And finally, after 6 months, he felt it. He could feel that he didn't know how it had happened, but he just wasn't as in tune with Master as he had been before. And then he realized it started when he took that initiation from the other sadhu. Had nothing to do with the sadhu, but Swamiji's road to freedom was as a disciple of Master. And if Master had wanted him to have these initiations, he would have given them to him. It wouldn't have been necessary for him to be initiated by someone else. So we have to realize that, these initiations, we don't have any idea what's going on. Something much deeper is happening. So Swami said he repudiated those initiations. He said as soon as he did that, he said his relationship with Master was restored. Isn't that interesting? This is what I was talking about yesterday, talking all about that attunement. And it came to me that amulet with Ma's picture on it, I just shouldn't wear it. And Swami Satchidananda, a wonderful cousin of Swamiji's, I would call it, because Satchidananda was a disciple of Swami Shivananda, and Swami had tremendous respect for that line. And Satchidananda's disciple, his twin brother spiritually, was Swami Chidananda, whom Swami Kriyananda described as the sadhu in America in India that I respect the most. So there was no question of integrity or anything like that. And he was giving satsangs in town, and out of friendship, a lot of Ananda people were going because Satchidananda never took advantage of his spiritual position. He totally supported us in our relationship to Swami. When Satchidananda was visiting us and giving a satsang, he sat down and he said, it's very kind of you to to ask me to give a satsang. He said, but I'm a bit at a loss. And he said, because I can't think of a single thing that Swami Kriyananda has failed already to teach you. And it was just like, that was perfect. So it was a very nice relationship. But in any case, so a lot of people went to see Satchidananda. Swami Kriyananda was out of the country at the time. But I knew that I shouldn't go. I wasn't the least bit attracted to him. His teaching was totally consistent and he was absolutely respectful. But I just knew that I shouldn't go. So I didn't go. And there was no question of loyalty or anything like that. I just didn't want another energy. It wasn't going to help me. So coming all the way back to where I was in Los Angeles, but I was in Los Angeles and there was nobody else around except just the people I was traveling with. And so we went to see a disciple of Swami Muktananda's, who it was, Chidvilasananda, this woman. But here's the whole point of it. It was a fantastically staged show, including, and this for me was one of my funnest parts. We were in there for 3 hours for this satsang, and when we came out, they had this huge food concession, including fresh baked bread, fresh baked cookies, fresh made pizza. So you come out after 3 hours of this thing, and you're really hungry, and this aroma of fantastic food just overwhelms you. And, they made hundreds of dollars feeding the starving devotees at that point. I just said to David, that is so good. So these people were good at what they did. And I'm joking in saying that, but they were very good at what they did. So this has nothing to do with spirituality. But they were not well trained in this small thing. We sat in that satsang hall for maybe an hour before the woman guru appeared. And different disciples stood up and told stories. And of course, since this is what I do all the time, I listened attentively. They were fascinating stories. This woman is really something. I think she's still living. And they had really interesting stories. Muktananda's path is filled with exotic things. So they told one weird, interesting, exciting, life-changing event after another. But they never, I think without a single exception, they never made it into a principle. It was an interesting story about the guru, which made you very eager to see her, because she was so interesting. And it was something that had happened to them personally with her. So at the end of it, what I felt was, well, I wasn't at all attracted to the guru, but I was intrigued. But I felt left out. Rather than included, I felt left out. Oh, because you were so lucky to have that experience. Because it was never translated into a principle, there was nothing I could do except think how awesome that you got to have that experience. And the wisdom of what Swami, and I didn't even know how to translate it, not that I was trying, but I wouldn't have known how to translate it into attunement with the guru, because there was no principle. It was her personality and this person's good karma. And I thought, my gosh, thank heaven for Swami Kriyananda. That's been my experience every time I visited any ashram, no matter how wonderful, and many of them are wonderful, is that Swamiji is so comprehensive. Master's path is so inclusive. It goes from every day to the infinite, and it covers all the space in between. Now I'm just going to finish this last thought so I don't have to come here tomorrow. The only other real dispute I had with Swamiji was when he said, he left Italy for India a few months before this huge lawsuit was filed by this actually mentally unbalanced man who filed this huge lawsuit against Ananda Sisi, accusing us of being a cult that preyed on that enslaved weak-minded people. And actually, the law under which he sued us, in America we were sued also, but it was a civil suit, and the issue was money. In Italy, the laws that he sued under were the laws that were designed to bust the mafia. to bust criminal organizations. So they were criminal charges that would result in prison time. It was very, very different. So it was really serious. And about 6 or 7 or 9 of our people were actually swept up and put in prison for a week until we managed to sort that out. The whole lawsuit, I think, took 7 years to resolve, until it was finally decided that this was a mentally unbalanced person, and we were more than innocent. There's another rule in Italian law. We were more than innocent. There had never been any basis for the suit in the first place, so the whole thing was erased, and a ruling was given changing the definition of religion in Italy, because there was freedom of religion in Italy, but only for authorized religions. And the only authorized religion, because the decision was left to the Catholic Church, was, surprise, the Catholic Church. And just prior to that ruling, Buddhism had been declared a legitimate religion. But after that ruling, it was changed. So in both America and in Italy, our lawsuits significantly changed the landscape of religious freedom. And I believe because of the EU, what happened in Italy also affected all of Europe. That is off to the side. But when the whole thing came down and our people were taken to jail, and Swami was supposed to have been arrested, they had delayed the police raid until Swami came back. And Jyotish and Devi had gone to Italy and were staying in Swami's house. The police were watching the house, and Jyotish looked enough like Swami that they thought Swami had returned. So they swept in to arrest Swami Kriyananda, or 5 in the morning, but it was Jyotish. So they couldn't do it. So they accidentally didn't get Swamiji. So Swami is in India, and he's quite distressed about this. I'm the leader of this community. I take responsibility. If anything is wrong, I should be the one who's experiencing it. He wanted to get on a plane and come back to Italy and go to jail with everyone else. His health was, he couldn't even make the trip, what to speak of going to jail, but it was a long saga before Swami accepted. Finally, he said, the winning argument to get him not to go, and he wrote this himself, I'm running over time today, we're just going to have to live with it. He said, was if he went to Italy and was put in jail, everyone would be so worried about him in jail that they wouldn't have any energy left over to sort out the legal issue. And he was absolutely correct. Plus, there was just no way. There was no medical, absolutely was medically impossible. But right at that time, Swamiji was in the shower, in the bathroom of his house, and he fell. And he fell backwards, and the shower had like a 4-inch lip that was about 2 inches wide, a tile lip. It was, you just step into the shower. You step over this little ridge, and you're inside the shower. He fell backwards, flat on his back, in the center of his back, full weight on that sharp tile ridge. And he broke ribs and bruised. It was many months before that healed. It went on for a very long time. So he's talking to me on the phone. And it was very funny. How did he put it? Let me think if this is the right one. I think this is when we said, Swami slipped in the bathroom. He said, no, I didn't slip, I fell. He kept correcting us. I didn't slip, I fell. And then he said, I fell in the bathroom. I really have hurt myself. He said, I hope it helps with the karma in Assisi. In other words, he was trying to take the karma, he was taking the karma into his own body, just like that. So I wrote that story, and I put it in because that was quite a story. Swami totally objected to that story, absolutely, to that line, absolutely. I said, it's what you said, sir. He said, I don't care if I said it, I don't want it in the book. I said, look, it's a 5-page story. This is the end of the story. This is me, the author, with this ridiculous sense of artistic integrity. It's the whole story. It's a great story, sir. It's very important. We have to put it in here. And he said no, and I said yes. Then again, I went to bed, and I was up on the roof there in my little tent, and I woke up very early. When I'm working, I tend to go to bed early and wake up really early. I woke up at 4 in the morning with this idea of how I could save the story and finesse it a little bit. And at 5, I'm already there in my computer. At 5, Swami comes in his bathrobe and his hair disheveled. And he says, you can't. And I said, it's all right, sir, I've already changed it. And then he said, once we were clear, he said, it may be true, but it's not something a person should say about himself. He said, even if I did, he said, it's not something a person should say about himself. And what I felt from Swamiji at that moment was very simple. It's a sacred trust from God to be able to do something like that. And he was more than willing to say it to me because he knew that I understood it, but he was not willing to publish it while he was living. So I put it into Light Bearer because at that point I felt that from him, it's fine now because it was true. And he took karma on his body all the time. I mean, that was just a significant part of who he was, and it seemed like an important thing for me to say. So, my friends, that's it for today. Talk to you tomorrow. Yes, next week. God bless.